So we're going to talk about architecting SharePoint 2016. This is me. I like to have big pictures of myself everywhere. No. I'm a Microsoft MVP, have been for 10 years. I'm a Pluralsight author as well. You can get me at helloitsliam.com. There's a common theme here, hello it's Liam, and then my LinkedIn profile is not. But feel free to reach out to me if you want to. If you want to tweet stuff, I'm okay with that, just be nice. Yes, I have a couple of courses on Pluralsight, mostly hacker courses. So if you're into the security hacking stuff and you want to hack SharePoint, I have a course that tells you how to do that. That's kind of one of my areas of expertise is hacking into SharePoint, which is good fun. So what are we going to talk about? Topology designs, MinRole, and then MinRole version 2, which you may not even know there's a MinRole version 2, but we'll talk about MinRole version 2. New topology designs, scaling out, features and services, database infrastructure, and then we'll review whatever we feel like we want to talk about. Now, just because I have slides doesn't mean we have to stick to them, just so you know. If you want to talk about something else, just tell me. Just try and make it so it kind of relates to what we're talking about. I like to be fairly flexible like that. So, let's talk about server requirements. Well, before we do that, what SharePoint versions are we running? Who's running 2016? Okay, so that's weird that you came to an architect in 2016. Okay, lab stuff. Okay, that's cool. I'll let you off. yeah, I already run it. It's working great. Now, did we do it right? 2013? Okay, kind of expected that. 2010? Do I even go any further back, like 2007? I knew there'd be at least a couple. We're not going any further back than that, are we? Because if you are, you need to just leave the room now. Anybody who's pre-2007, I mean, even 2007, I mean, come on. But yes, so we still run. Who runs multiple versions? Yeah, I'm going to say there's normally quite a few that run. And then who's got Office 365 in the equation too? Of course. Has anybody figured this out yet? Like, we just run with multiple versions of everything. Well, we can't upgrade 2007 because it's mission critical. We can't upgrade 2010 because that's mission critical. And then, let's do 365, we'll do that. So you put stuff in 365, and then you think, 2016 is out, let's just do that. So you end up with a mix of stuff, and we never actually get to migrate stuff. So let's talk about server requirements first. So these are server requirements that Microsoft have right now. The most important thing is to look at this column here, which is the scenario and the deployment type. So there's two initial ones, which is based around what's called the single server role with SQL Server. So this could be a single server with SQL Server on. Anybody have that in their production environment? A single SharePoint server with SQL Server on the box. Do you have that in production? Good. I have lots of clients that's what they have, which is just bizarre. But yes, so there's two different scenarios here. So you have development, testing, and then you also have pilot and acceptance. And then based on the roles that you determine in those boxes. So single server role is basically everything. So you're looking at different types of RAM. Now, yes, you can. For a development box, remember when Microsoft came out and said, you've got to have like 24 gig of RAM in a dev VM and everything else? Trust me, it runs on 16 perfectly fine. We have lots of devs at work. We write lots of code. 16 gig is the most we ever allocate. And that box will be a self-contained VM with Active Directory, SQL Server, and SharePoint 2016 on it, and it works perfectly fine. 16 gig is more than ample. 2013, on the other hand, not so much. But yes, 64-bit, 4 cores. Anybody who can't allocate more than 4 cores to a server, you need to buy better servers. And then disk space. I don't even know why Microsoft do this anymore. Because if you can't have more than 80 gig, my phone is bigger than that. I mean, really? I have more disk space in my own cell phone. My laptop over there runs a 500 gig and a 1 terabyte SSD drives. If I can run that in my laptop, I can afford to put it in the server. So that's like the two simple roles. The second ones is where we start to scale, and this is where we'll have a web server application with a tier. We start to break the roles out, and we'll talk about roles in a bit. And then, of course, we have web service and a tier for pilot and acceptance. Notice that when we start to tier the servers, and it's one thing that I've been teaching for quite some time, the more servers you have, the less RAM you need to allocate. Because there seems to be this weird logic of if I have more servers, I have to put the same amount of RAM in every single one. That defeats the purpose of scaling servers out. You don't need to have 24 gig of RAM in a web server. Just because the other server has 24 doesn't mean it has to match, because the load that you are now putting on the server is less than it was before. So as you scale, you can reduce the footprints of the servers. No one ever does that. I'll be honest with you, whenever I've seen environments and I come in and audit them, they all have the same spec all the way across. I'm like, why have you got, that makes no sense. But you can reduce it. The more you scale out, and as we start to talk about scaling out and go to more servers, and especially for 2016 with the min roles, you can definitely reduce the RAM in the servers. You don't need to have that much. So let's talk about topology designs, and let's see who has what. This is always a good test. See who actually built it to a prescribed model or went with the flow. Because I've seen those too, where you just kind of go with the flow and add servers as you feel. So SharePoint 2007, we had the small server farm. And not the single server farm, don't get confused. The small server farm, one SharePoint web server, one database server. And for SharePoint 2007, that was great. It's because it didn't really do a lot. We then had what was called the medium server farm, which was 2 web servers and 2 database servers. Anybody have 2 database servers or more? Yeah, 2 or at least more than 1 database server for your SharePoint environment. Who only has 1? Okay, so we have a few. Okay. And then in 2007, we had large server farms where you started to scale. This was the prescribed models that we got. It was web servers, application servers, and database servers. It was based on the old standard way of building a 3-tier architecture, presentation, traffic coming in, heavy lift, load stuff, and then core data. That was really how we built SharePoint for 2007. 2010, they kind of went crazy on us. 2007 was really straightforward. It was just, you have these 3 designs, stick to it. And if you went outside of those designs, Microsoft would smack you if you had to log a support call. Because they'd be like, what? That's not supported. Anything that was not prescribed was not supported. 2010, they just went all weird. So we have these limited deployments, which is basically the one server farm where that one kind of came to fruition, where it was, you know what, you can stick it all on one box, which is bad design, by the way. Just because it's on the slide doesn't mean you should do it. It's a bad design. Then they went to these limited deployments where you had 2 servers, and then they also started to add in small server farms. So we had these limited deployments, and then small server farms where we had 2 web servers and then n number of database servers, depending how you decide to build that infrastructure. They also went to 3 tiers, where we went to 2 web servers, an application server, and n. And you know what? For most clients that I worked with back for 2010, that's what they ended up with. 2 web servers, an app server, and then whatever the database infrastructure might be. Because it was the minimum requirement for load balancing. Because it meant your end users stopped calling you all the time because the SharePoint server was slow. Because there was 2 servers. So you could load balance between the 2. And then database server infrastructure back then, I mean, you would have gone with failover clustering, mirroring, witness mirroring, whatever you wanted to at that point. But that's really the design that most clients that I worked with opted for, because it was the kind of the bare minimum. Then we went up to the small server farm, which was the different one, which is 2 web servers, an application server. Then you split SQL into different infrastructure. So we had n servers to handle the core databases. So when I'm talking about core, I'm talking things like configuration databases, service applications, shared services, content databases, and then search ended up on its own. So we started to scale. This was Microsoft's attempt to, well, let's look at scaling, because we have some clients that want to have big server farms. Then they opted again for the medium server farm. So you notice we've already had 2 slides just on 2010. We still got more. So 2010 went for the medium server farm, where really you could have whatever number you wanted to in any of those layers. Starts to make it more complicated, doesn't it? It's like, well, I can have web servers, search application servers, and then split the databases. So 2010 added more. What was the goal for this? Flexibility. It was for scalability. Now, give you the little hint of why they did this. Because the first rounds of Office 365 and BPOS were written on 2010. So the reason they had to build it this way is so that they could run BPOS or early Office 365. Not for you guys. Microsoft never anticipated that you would build something like this. It was for them to stand up servers for their Office 365 clients. Then, of course, we went to the large server farm, where really they didn't really put a number. It was you just have a group. I'm just going to have a group of servers. I worked on a SharePoint 2010 farm that had 25 servers in the farm. Do you realize how painful that was to patch? I'm sure you've all patched a SharePoint server by now. Imagine doing 25. Oh, that one's failed. What do you do now? I've still got 17 left. It's that thought process. Then, of course, you could scale to application server groups, crawl groups, query groups, core services, sandbox code groups. They made it so you could literally just start scaling to your heart's content in any way. And what did we end up with? No one doing it. Because what was the optimal way of doing it? Well, no one knew. Because the prescribed model, because remember when Microsoft bought out the 2007 ones, they gave you all the diagrams, didn't they? And like, here's the diagrams, 3, 4, 5, and that was it. 2010 came, they gave you these humongous Visio diagrams with 50 million diagrams that you had to pick from yourself. Like, I'll go with that one. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was the right one. An actual fact, which is one of the reasons we'll talk about going forward in a minute, is it was actually bad that they did this. And I'll explain why in a minute. So 2013, it came to fruition. Limited deployments, exactly the same as 2010. Then they built this, they changed it, didn't they? They didn't do these groups anymore. They called them simple workload, fault tolerant. It's just new buzzwords, it doesn't mean anything. But they brought these new words in where you basically had this idea of a batch processing server, which was the equivalent of an application server, which we had in 2010 and 2007, and then your number of databases, but you combine the roles together. Now the reason I'm going through this as we go is because it'll lead to where min-role came from. Then we had the idea of search optimized, where you basically had, and this is important to understand, front-end servers, batch processing, search, query, crawl, and then the database servers. They started to define the different types of roles that a server should have. Did that actually mean anything? No. Well, it did because you designated it in the install, didn't you? You went in the install and said, that's a search server. What did it do? Nothing. It installed everything the same as if you'd selected it as a front-end server. It didn't really change anything because even in 2013, it still installed everything anyway. It didn't kind of say, well, this one's a front-end server, so it should only have this. And this one's a search server, it should only have this. It went, I'm a SharePoint server. Everything was over. It was as simple as that. As soon as those services were enabled, everything was on. So then they had the large farms. I mean, the fact that it has to fill the slide just for one large server farm, that gives you an idea of how painful it's been. So then they had this idea of what was called traditional. So traditional was the standard model that everybody went to, where we had web server, app server, database server. The pros for this, we had limited designs. That's a good thing. The word limited is not a bad thing. Limited designs is good because it's repeatable. So remember that. That's the word for today, repeatable. Supported specific topologies only. That makes your life for support and Microsoft's life very, very simple because they're like, well, you're not following a prescribed model. It was 3-tier. Everyone knows what 3 tiers are. And then it was a scalable design. What was the cons? Well, actually, for those specific clients that Microsoft had, and maybe you guys, you were limited to a specific topology design. You couldn't really just go, I want to add more horsepower to it. It didn't quite work that way. All servers contained all components. Everything. So let's give you an example. You deploy the managed metadata service. Okay? You deploy that into your SharePoint farm. Which server is it hosted on? Anybody know? So let's say we have 2 web servers, an app server. Which server is the managed metadata service deployed to when you deploy it as a service application? Sorry? All of them. Every single one. And you may not know that, but it is, because when you expand IIS, there's a bit that says the SharePoint services piece, and when you expand it, all of the service application WCF endpoints that make the service applications run exist on every single server. And how does SharePoint know which one to call? It round robins them internally. It has an internal built-in load balancer that just picks one. Anybody ever seen the issue where you go to like the managed metadata and it gives you like a red error? It can't connect to something? I'm sure you would have seen that by now. That can sometimes be because the node that the round-robin load balancer picked isn't working. And you have no control over that because it just does it. Updating, upgrading, and patching was the most awful thing ever. It still is right now in 2013 or just even 2010. And really, there was no role optimization. If you wanted to optimize a server to be a search server, you had to do that. You had to go in and turn things off, disable things, whatever else, and then live with the fact that SharePoint would complain that you turned something off. So Microsoft introduced what was called the streamlined approach, which introduced some different processes, so different options. There were front-end servers, distributed cache servers, batch processing, and workloads, and then database servers. Very specific designated roles that were applied as part of this streamline. And any number of servers could reside in those roles. What were the pros for this? That means you could just custom build a topology. You could literally say, I need 4 web front ends, I need 2 distributed cache servers, Now, however, there were hard limits. There were some hard limits that Microsoft put in. Like, for example, every single server can't have the distributed cache service running on it. There were some limitations. And what was good is Microsoft told you that when you did it and enabled it on everything, it would be like, no, you've got too many. Only 3 or 4 can have it. You had tiered optimization, you had better scaling, and what was good about this is that as you built those roles, that there was a level of optimization built in, that they were for low latency, and high load. So there were some elements of kind of giving you the vision of what Microsoft was building with the SharePoint infrastructure. What were the cons? In order to have a better server environment, you ended up with a larger footprint. You ended up with way more servers than you often expected. The amount of environments I've gone into, and it's like a SharePoint intranet for 1,000 people, and they've got like 10 servers. And you're just thinking, are people really hammering the intranet? Are they uploading 50 gig files? And they're like, no, it's just spreadsheets. And you're just like, you want to use my laptop instead? You don't need 10 servers. But to give them the redundancy and high availability that's now expected, they had to go with such large-scale SharePoint farms. Once again, all the servers contained all of the components, every single thing. And then, of course, we could talk about updating, upgrading, and patching till the cows come home, because it is the most awful. Whenever I get a task that comes over and they say, hey, any chance you can do the upgrade? No. I don't have 400 years of my life that I just want to get rid of. So no, we don't. It's horrible. So this is where min role came in. So I remember sitting in a meeting about a couple of years ago at the Microsoft campus in Redmond and asking a question and saying, and actually it was more of a security focused question of how can we minimize the surface area of attack on a SharePoint server. That was my question to the product team at Redmond. And their response was min role. That didn't actually answer my question, but it will give us an insight into what they tried to do here. So the first thing is, what is min role? Well, min role is Microsoft's first attempt for you to be able to build repeatable farms very, very easily. Now, you might question that and say, but I can do that now with PowerShell. Well, of course you can. But this is a little bit simpler when it comes to actually building and repeating how farms get provisioned. It's limited to SharePoint 2016, so don't expect it to be backwards compatible to 2013. That's never going to happen. It's just not. Because of the way 2013 was built, the underlying architecture just isn't built that way. So this is purely 2016 and forward. There was a new installation wizard that was given to us. Well, I would say new. It looks exactly the same as the other one with different options. There's a simple process now for designing and deploying consistently, and I'll explain that through. And then the most important thing is this last one. There's a method for checking compliance of the architecture and topology. So you know how this is. I've worked with a bunch of dev guys for years. I write code. I'm a dev at heart. I'm also an IT pro and whatever else. But anybody a dev? Perfect. It's the dev's fault every time. No. So I moved from the UK, moved to the States. I joined a company, and the first thing I did was rebuild lots of the virtual machines that they use for dev. And then what happened is the devs got on the machines and realized that they couldn't do anything. And they were like, well, I can't do anything. And I went, yeah, you can. Just log in as your account, and you can do whatever you need to. No, but I haven't got the right permission. was like, yes, you have. You have exactly the permission that you need. And they're like, yeah, but I'm used to logging in as the farm service or as the local admin. And I went, see, there's the problem. You shouldn't be logging in as the farm service or as the administrator account, because that's not what those services accounts are for. You should be logging in with a limited access account so you can treat it like a normal user and deploy like a normal Power Admin user. And the reason I bring this up is because one of the things that we tend to find is I would build a brand new virtual machine. It'll be perfect. It'll be beautiful. Everything would work. I would open the browser. It would just load. There'd be no errors. I would have cleared down the health analyzer, which is a feat in its own right, and it would be perfectly clean. And then I'd go back on it a week later after the devs had been on it, and all kinds of crap had been enabled. And I'm like, what just happened? And they're like, well, it's not working like it used to. And I'd go and well, why'd you turn this on? Well, I needed it. No, you don't. And stuff would get enabled and everything, but you would never know until someone moaned about it, and then you got on the environment. I used to see this in production environments too. Oh yeah, we deployed some stuff. What did you deploy? And it's just some random solution. Oh, we were on this site, Codeplex, downloaded a solution and we put it in production. Okay, if anybody's done that, you just need to slap yourself and get rid of it. You should never deploy something from Codeplex unless you've reviewed the code first. Same as buying a third-party product. Don't trust them. No. So why was MinRole? MinRole was built because you define the role. This is the goal. Microsoft wanted you to pick a role and then have intelligence that it would go ahead and control the services that were enabled on the servers. So remember, 2013, you go and pick a front-end web server or a batch processing server. It does nothing. It just tags it as an application server. But this one in MinRole, we choose application server, or we choose front-end server or distributed cache server or whatever else. It now only enables the services and components that are actually required for that role. So that means that we now have a more logical architecture, because when we say that's what the server is, that's exactly what the server is. It's not an application server with a bunch of options that we've just added because one of the devs went on and added some stuff. Not that the devs do it all the time, but the IT pros would never make mistakes. But logical architecture. And then, of course, you can mix and match the roles to give you the best design that you want to. And the most important thing is, for me, it does reduce the surface area of attack. So, anybody ever done a port scan against the SharePoint server? Because if you are, me and you are going to chat. So, port scan, love it, fantastic. You run a port scan against a SharePoint server, there's millions of ports that are open on a SharePoint server. And probably half the ones that you don't even know. Like anything that runs upon the 33 to 36,000 mark, that's all your WCF endpoints. That's all your service applications. That's open by default. There's no firewall rule that blocks there. Oh, there's port 80, obviously, SSL 443. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones for doing SMB, DNS, everything else. Just lots of them. And even some of the services that spin up open up ports that are available to other stuff. So with MinRole, it reduces the services, the deployed components, so that your surface area of attack is now limited. Because if anybody's ever done the work where you have to follow things like the NIST standards and harden a SharePoint environment, which you can't actually do correctly with the NIST guidelines because it'll break SharePoint. But if you do the majority of them, you're basically just doing exactly what MinRole does. Turns off the components that don't need to be there. So how does it help us? Well, it lets us do repeatable, in compliance. It helps us manage them a little bit better, control them, potentially reduce the footprint of the servers that we have, and reduce the components that are on the servers, which gives us better performance. That's the ultimate goal. That's how MinRole helps us. It helps us now have better servers that perform better, that are reduced to the amount of services and components that they need, so that when we deploy something, that server is optimized to that specific role. So MinRole version 1, and I'm going to call it version 1 because version 2 is on the verge of coming out. Version 1 was Microsoft's first goal, first attempt. So in the wizard, when we actually go and build a server now, we end up with these options. Single server, I shouldn't have to explain that one. That's not production, by the way. So just remind you, that's not production. No single servers in production. We have a custom role. The custom role is exactly what 2013 was. You basically just choose custom and you enable whatever you want to enable. There's no optimization. It doesn't reduce the footprint of the servers. It just deploys them as if it's a 2013 server. Nothing special. The front-end servers, that's exactly what it says. It becomes a web server with nothing else on it. It reduces it to its minimal requirements, one of which will be obviously IIS. Obviously that has to happen. I'm hoping for the day when that goes away. But IIS, the ports for IIS, and then specific front-end components that it requires. An application server is exactly the application server that you need. It just has the service applications and things like the timer jobs that run there. Nothing else. An application server, in all fairness, doesn't actually have necessarily the website features enabled on that server. So you can't even browse to the SharePoint site on the application server because they shouldn't actually be deployed there. Distributed cache server, it's exactly what it is, nothing else. Obviously that requires IIS, so you still have the server footprint, but the application components and the front-end components don't exist anywhere. It's just distributed cache. Then of course you have search, that's just the search components. So that's MinRole version 1. And that was great for the testing that's gone through for the past, well, since like May this year, as people have been using it. It's worked out great. But it means if you count the number of servers up that you're going to need, so let's say you have 2 servers in your database infrastructure, to have a fully compliant MinRole environment, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you now need 4 servers as a minimum. In a fully, and I'll keep using the word compliant, and you'll understand what I mean. For a fully compliant MinRole, you need 4 servers, plus the database servers. So if you currently only have a web server, an app server, and a database server, I've just increased your architecture by 2 more servers because you now need to scale out. But that gives you a fully compliant MinRole. Now, if you want to go high availability, see now we're starting to add a lot more servers. MinRole version 2. This was only officially announced. So a week ago at Microsoft Ignite, they officially announced this, that actually you get the same sets, so single server, custom, front-end application, search, and then you have these 2. A front-end server with distributed cache, and then an application server with search. Because I don't always want to have minimum of 4 servers plus the database. I want to be able to use and combine roles together. These 2 roles were created based on feedback from people that were through the TAP program and the testing because they wanted to have better, smaller farms. Because if you use just standard MinRole version 1, it's only really beneficial for large-scale farms because you have to have 4 as a minimum. Then you want to go HA, you're going to have to double that. So you're now at 8 servers plus SQL, so you're now at 10 servers, whereas these 2 roles allow us to combine things together. And so you can now start to mix and match the way the roles go together. So this is important as we come to designing the infrastructure. So what are the new topology designs that SharePoint 2016 gives us? Because obviously we need to pick these. So the first one is we have front-end servers, distributed cache, search server, application server, and database. That is the minimum. So if there's nothing you learn from this, and you're not going to do any, so I suppose that if you're going to build a 2016 environment after November of this year, then you can utilize the new roles that will exist. But you have to go with Feature Pack 1, which isn't actually out yet until November. But this is the minimum design that you can go for right now. So I've worked with a bunch of clients, and we have these designs as the minimum. High availability. That just looks like crazy amount of servers, doesn't it? So we now end up with at least 2 servers in each role. So that means 2 web, 2 app, 2 distributed cache, 2 server, multiple database servers, and then of course, if we then decide to add Office Online Server, you'll need 2 more servers. Because of course, they like to make your life more complicated, and you have to have Office Online Server on a different set of servers. And of course, you want it high availability too, so you have to have two. And then, of course, you might decide to go even further than this and go, well, what about anybody using a stretched farm for SharePoint? Anybody even know what a stretched farm? You got stretched farm? Cool. Stretched farm it's a beautiful design. The idea of stretching the SharePoint infrastructure and SQL between two data centers. Very limited ways of doing it. So, for example, there's actually some random number of like 183.7 mile is the distance. I don't know how they got to 183.7 or something stupid like that. But that's the maximum distance that you can have the servers apart. So if you've got data center from one side of the country to the other, you can't do that kind of SharePoint server farm. But what it means is that I could have this infrastructure sitting in data center 1 and then a smaller version of that in data center 2, but they're all part of the same SharePoint farm. So you have a global load balancer, the URL comes in, it hits the global load balancer, goes to data center 1 fails, we instantly file the URL over to data center 2. So you can now do stretched cross data center. It's a great design. It takes a lot more to set up because it involves SQL always on clustering underneath the covers to make sure that works and a whole bunch of other stuff. But I'm not going to talk too much about that one today, but if you want to have a chat afterwards, let me know. So yes, so then we opted for the custom minimum because we can still go custom. So you can use min role as the front end, and then you can basically use custom role for any of the others. So you do have the ability to mix and match. So if you want to get the benefits of an optimized front-end web server, then use min role for the web servers. But the application server can be custom role, just like 2013, and host everything. So you have the ability to mix and match those things together as you need to. This means you can scale at any level if you want to. You can add more application servers. You can then decide to break the custom roles and go back to min roles. You have the ability to mix and match as you need to. It's all manual design and configuration. If you want to go for a custom high availability group, then we can go with min role for specific servers. So maybe like the search servers and the web servers are utilizing the min role options, but then for the other blocks of servers, we just use custom. And you can then determine whatever you want to do. Now the key to choosing whether you want to go all min role or whether you want to go a mix is really down to number of servers that you've got that you can play with, and really down to what you have right now in your infrastructure as far as SharePoint goes. If your SharePoint components don't support min role, so just remember, not every application and third-party component is going to support min role. Because when you deploy it, it's going to expect certain pieces to run on a server that you deploy to, but if they don't exist there, then that application isn't supported. So just be aware you can't just, let's do min role and shove everything on it, it'll be fine. So you have all the different ones, and of course, Office Online Server, you're going to have 2 more servers because that's how we build the high availability every single time. We then also have custom only, which means we just ignore min role. You can do this too. If you really don't want to use the min role because it's just, you don't like the name of it, I don't know, you just opt and build custom only designs, no min role, you can build whatever you need to. But trust me, there probably will be a point where Microsoft will force you into using min role. I don't know why you wouldn't use it. I have clients that don't use it because they don't quite understand how it's going to affect anything. But you would, if you're building and architecting a new 2016 environment, min role is what you use. There would be no reason for you to not. Then, of course, we have the combined roles, which give you the smaller environments, which means if you are on the smallest SharePoint server farm right now, then you can still do that, and you can go with a combined option. So you don't have to have the minimum, which was 4. You can now go with effectively the minimum of 3 if you went with some database infrastructure and then a combined roles. A question?
So if you currently have a traditional approach, you can combine a cap server with cache. That's what you're talking about, the same number of servers.
Yes. Yes, you can. You can combine those. Now, right now in 2016, the min role that's there right now, you can't do that because the moment you build like an application server as min role and try to activate distributed cache, it'll break that role. But with the feature pack 1, it will give you that. And we can do combined roles with high availability. So we can take our 3 and make it into a 6, and we can stay with the combined roles. So you have the flexibility of that too. These were literally like brand new. They never had these a week ago. These are the new designs that you can come up with. Okay, but what's the recommended topologies? So when we're looking at building SharePoint topologies, these are the kind of the roles that we've got, and then these are really where they should be built. Now, who has just a single SharePoint farm with everything in? Yeah, so I'll clarify that one. So basically, all of your service applications, your SharePoint search, and all of your content resides on one SharePoint farm. Okay, who has a separate search farm just dedicated to search? Okay, dedicated services farm with just stuff. Okay, and then obviously a dedicated content farm. Most people will just have everything in one infrastructure. They'll build a SharePoint environment and they'll throw it all in. All the databases will be on the same thing. They'll have multiple site collections that'll just exist in one content database. That's normally what happens, because what do? We build the servers, we put the disk in, and we go install, and we just go click, done. Or we use PowerShell. You know, you go online, you download Auto SP Installer, you fill the script out, and just run the button and go done, and it's done. Like, it's easy. But we don't actually think the process through of where things should be, because we could actually have 3 separate SharePoint environments that handle, one's for content, one's for service applications, one's for search, because that gives us better scalability. It means you have to manage more, but it means we have different infrastructure and architecture for what we need. Now, as we choose the different roles, you can see where these roles would reside. So if I'm building a regular, when I say content, just imagine that's just a regular SharePoint environment. Then, of course, everything can reside in there. So you can use front-end web, you can use app, distributed cache, search, application with search, front-end with distributed cache, everything. So for most of you, when you build a 2016 environment, that's where you're going to sit. Because if you don't have separate farms for all of those, it'll just reside in the same farm. If you do happen to have a services farm, then of course you can't use these 2 new roles. You're not allowed to use those in a services one, and you can't use the front-end web. If you're building a search one, then of course you don't have any of these 3 or this one, but you can use the search and the search. So it kind of makes sense really when you think about it, that as you build extra SharePoint farms and scale out, because at some point when I've worked with like global organizations, they might have multiple SharePoint farms. They may have a dedicated SharePoint environment, and then they have for search, and then separate localized ones with content. Or they may have a central intranet with multiple search farms all over the place, depending how you design that architecture.
If you don't really care too much about scalability.
Okay. If you don't really care about scalability? I mean, as a minimum, you would want to go with a minimum of 3 servers. Like, because then you could utilize the new roles at the bottom.
No, but I'm saying like breaking out.
Okay.
Would you recommend that even if scalability wasn't?
Yeah, if scalability isn't an issue, then you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. It's one that Microsoft has kind of pushed, and it works really well because you isolate all the loads not just onto different servers in the same farm, but they're completely isolated farms, which does mean that you get better performance across, but it means you have to manage, 3 sets of SharePoint servers, 3 sets of database infrastructures, all that kind of stuff. But for most SharePoint implementations, it'll be single SharePoint farm, and that works perfectly fine. I mean, even Microsoft to some extent, they have their global one that kind of handles most of the world, and that seems to work well. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just have a quick look at some of the options. So okay, so first off, let me just go into, nope, that wasn't the one I wanted, that one. Okay, so I'm on my SharePoint server, and I'm going to go to Manage Servers in the farm. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'll tell you what, let me just see if I have yes, I do. Perfect. Okay. So as you can see, I have a minimum compliant built SharePoint 2016 environment. Now I'm in central administration. Now right now, when you go into 2013, your central administration doesn't look like that. So when you go to managed servers in the farm, this is what you now see in 2016. So you'll notice a couple of things. The first thing is the role. So it's now clearly defined of what that role would be. So front end, application, search, whatever it would be. Then right next to it is something called compliant. And they should look like that. It should say yes, 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 yes. I'm just saying, that's what it's supposed to look like. If it says no, 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 that's a bad thing. But it says yes, which means that all of my servers are in compliance. So how does it do that? How does it know that my server's in compliance? That's because when you deploy min role, first off, you'll notice that it only deploys the services that it actually requires. So you'll notice that my search server, that's all it's got. It didn't get all of this stuff over here, which in 2013 it would have had. It would have had everything. Now it only gives you the minimum footprint of what's actually needed. But it knows that it's incompliant because of the health analyzer rules and the jobs that run. So there are new health analyzer rules that will run on a frequent basis. You can run them manually that check for compliance. Because it now knows that when I deploy a search server, this is what I'm expecting to see. If somebody goes on the search server and decides to enable something that shouldn't be there, then when that job runs, it will flag it as out of compliance. Now, the good thing about this, when it's out of compliance, it will say no, and then in little parentheses, it will say fix. Now, I know you don't believe me, because nothing in SharePoint is ever that simple. When you click fix, it just does it. But it actually does. But how do you think it fixes it? So if I enable, let's say I push central administration onto like a distributed cache. It's quite clear not supposed to be there. So how's it going to fix it? Just turns the service off. It just gets rid of it. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing, because you actually might have needed whatever that was you enabled on that box to be there. But SharePoint doesn't understand that. So there's an element of you having to understand what it is you're trying to fix. So when it says it's out of compliance, you need to know what it's actually out of compliance with, and then actually know whether to fix it or whether to change the role of the server. So you don't, just because it says fix doesn't mean you just press it, fix, done. As much as it's nice to say, yeah. And anybody do that thing when, you know, the red bar in central admin? Anybody just delete the stuff out so it's not there? Now see, I can see you all laughing, which means one of two things. You either agree and you may have done it, because I know that when we build a SharePoint environment, nobody wants to see a red bar. Do they? I don't want to see a red bar. I don't want to go into central admin and go, because that just makes you look like you don't know how you built the SharePoint server. So what do? You go in and go, yeah, I can't fix that one. Delete. I can't fix that one. And then the next step on top of that is you click in the one that's causing the red error. You know you can't fix it, so you click on the view button, and then you disable the health analyzer rule anyway. So it never runs again. So you're never going to have the red bar, because no one likes the red bar. It's the same with this. You don't just fix it, you need to figure out why it does it. But it's great. It will literally check the servers one by one, looking for whether it's in compliance. And of course, it knows what to look for because of the services that are enabled as part of the template of when things are deployed. SharePoint now knows this. It now knows that that server is supposed to have this as against that server that's having this. So for example, if I just scroll across back here and do central admin and go manage services in the farm, let me just reduce the size of that a bit so we can see it. Not that small. What you'll see now is that when services get deployed, we now have this option that shows up which talks about whether it's a service application, whether it's going to auto-provision, whether it's not going to auto-provision, and then again, if it's in compliance. So this is not just server level now. This is down at services level too. What services are enabled on those servers? Are they supposed to be enabled? Did I just enable it by default? You can also then say enable auto provision if you want something to auto provision. Now be aware that if you enable something as auto provision and it's not supposed to be part of that role, that when you auto provision it, it'll then flick the servers out of compliance. So it's kind of a weird, think of the logic through, it makes no sense, does it? I'll enable it, click. No, it's out of compliance. Disable. No, enable. It's like a weird design. But it lets you go ahead and enable auto provision of a service, and then if it does come out of compliance, then you can obviously choose to either change the role or modify the actual auto provisioned component that's been put in there. Now, if I go back to here, let's say that one of my servers ends up being out of compliance. I can actually click on convert this role. And you'll see now that I have the ability to change the role that's already been there. So right now it tells me that it's a front-end distributed cache and they match. But if I wanted to, I could literally come in and say, I want the app server. Oops, I didn't want to press F1. I can now change the role of the server on the fly. Now I suppose the question would be, what happens to that server while it's doing it? It just does it. I can honestly say, I'm going to touch some wood somewhere, it just does it. You click, change that to custom or whatever else, it'll just go ahead and do it. So, yes. So what it will do is, so if you have it set as distributed cache is an awkward one and we'll talk about that, but if I have it set as an app server and then make that a search server, it'll remove the components that were originally deployed and then re-provision the pieces that need to be provisioned on that server. So what's the worst that could happen? Let's click apply. It's working on it. It's the best message ever. And then it'll just go, and my server will shut down and nothing will work. No. But what should happen is, it shouldn't take long, but what it's doing everything that you would have to do manually in one go. It's just going to now roll that server into the custom mode. Now, the custom mode's a little bit of a strange one, because what it will do is it does it. Ta-da! It's completed. Look at that. How fantastic was that? Click OK. Go back to convert the server in this role, and now you'll see that it's actually been set as a custom role now. And it didn't kill the server. It didn't blue screen of death, or as Windows 10 gives us, the new pink screen of death ever so often. I'm sorry, I couldn't see you then. No, because that would be logical. Logical would mean that you would have some controls that would say, are you sure you really want to do this? Like, you can't do this. This is the central admin server. I mean, it does offer, I always find it funny, it offers messages like, are you sure? It's the same thing as when the end user calls you and says, I can't find my stuff. And they're like, I deleted it. Well, how did you delete it? Well, I pressed delete. Yeah, but it then asked you if you really, really wanted to, and you pressed it again. And you're like, and they're like, no, I didn't. No, that's the only way it works. You have to press it twice. Like, yeah. So there are some things in there. It's more about it'll flag it up in the health analyzer, and it will just complain and things like that. So I'm going to put this one back to my application server and click apply. Now, while that's doing that, I'm actually going to flick across to here, and of course, let me just make this so it fits my screen, fit the guest. Nope, it's this one. Nope. It's the pressure. It got to me. So my passwords are normally about 17 characters long, so I get nervous when I type. So we're looking at a different 2016 environment. This one's a little bit different. So what we'll see here, let me just make sure I've got this on, is I have a single farm. So it's not a large farm now. It's a single server farm because I'm just using one VM. And notice this time I get everything on there. As expected, single server dev farm, everything's great. And it's in compliant. I always like to have yes in compliant. Now the difference is with this farm is when I go back to central administration and click on system settings and do convert the role in this farm. This one gives us the other roles. So you lot will have never seen this, so you get a preview of what it looks like. This is feature pack 1. So you now get to see that the new roles that exist are just the same as any of the other roles that belong in there. Now there are some differences. For example, so I mentioned distributed cache. Distributed cache is a weird. Anybody had issues with distributed cache at some point in their environment? It's like the weirdest. It's built on technology that's actually Microsoft don't use anymore, which is weird. But when you move distributed cache roles around, you'll actually end up with components of the distributed cache still residing. So you need to run some PowerShell to remove the cache instances from the servers that you don't want to use. So just be aware you have to kind of change that around. If you choose a front-end distributed cache and then make that into an app server or a front-end, you'll have the same issue. But you have the ability now to flick a regular min role into one of the new roles at any point also. So you can go backwards and forwards to your heart's content. Now what's great about this is it means that you build a new intranet environment or whatever you build in. I worked on public-facing websites for probably about, it felt like 3 years, 4 years, where we just built public-facing websites on SharePoint. Not the regular anonymous ones, like full-on authentication, you have to pay to be a member and all that kind of fun stuff. And we built lots of those. And because SharePoint actually works really well for that. It worked really, really well. But one of the things that we found is that when we launched the website, it was always a big rush and surge of people that wanted to come to the SharePoint site, just as you would when you launch a new intranet. Everyone's like, ooh, new intranet, click, and you'll get like 50,000 people access it. That'll be the only time they'll ever hit the site, but it'll be when you go live. So what you can actually do is when you bring in servers, you can actually add servers into the farm, provision them as a min role, give you the scalability, and then scale back out again. So you can then come in and say, you know what, I'm going to drop that server back out now. I'm going to isolate it to a different role. I'm going to reduce the footprint, so start with 8 servers, and once you've got through the first 2 weeks, reduce it back down to 4 servers and combine the roles. Because now you know that realistically, like we have an intranet. So our intranet is hosted in the cloud. Well, it's not really in the cloud, it's in Amazon. We host it in Amazon. There's like 5,000 people that access the intranet. It's all in the Amazon cloud. It's all singing, all dancing. I don't really connect to it very often. I bet you guys have intranets in SharePoint, and you probably don't connect to it either. Yet you're the guys that probably built it. So we can reduce the footprint of the servers at any point. So let me go back. That's been reduced. So you can remove servers in and out or add them back in again. So let me go back to central admin. All right, we'll come back to that one in a second. Let me go back to the slides. Oh, not that one. Okay. So scaling options. Because, of course, the key is really knowing what to add, when to add, etc. So when we scale, you basically have 4 core options that are available to you. The first one is to increase the number of servers. I mean, that's a given. Add more servers, add more servers, add more servers. Just be aware that performance is not necessarily based on number of servers. I've seen environments where they have tons of servers and the performance is really, really bad. So throwing more servers at it doesn't always fix that issue. If you want to scale and increase the servers, mix the min roles. Mix the custom roles with the standard ones, or just scale each one out. Normally, web servers is where you'll get the most advantage. Because what's the key here? The key here is end user experience, isn't it? Like, just because your search server's slow, that doesn't mean anything. But if the front-end web server is slow, you'll never hear the end of it. Anybody still not running like a warm-up script yet? They come in the morning and wait 5 hours for SharePoint to wake up. Like that's historically one of those things. But we should be doing things to better, make the end user experience better. Create groups of servers. Put the web servers here, put them over here. Then maybe go to the next level where we're going to start using availability groups in SQL. That gives you not only stretched farms, but it also means that you have better performance and scalability. Most of the environments that I work with now all have availability groups. And we slice and dice the availability groups depending where we have environments too. So for example, I'm working with a client right now where we have on-premises servers in the core data center. Their secondary data center is too far away, so they couldn't do stretched, always on, because SharePoint won't support it. But we have a standalone DR farm in there, so basically two separate SharePoint farms. However, SQL will stretch perfectly fine to that data center. So we actually use a secondary availability group to bring in the content databases into the DR farm. So each of those farms have their own config database, they have their own service applications, but the content databases get synchronized via always on to that separate location. The same URLs are passed all the way through. So that means that you have a cold, hot standby environment in one data center, ready for the global DNS switch to be done, and then it just comes online. So utilize availability groups. That is the way that Microsoft want you to build an environment that's in SharePoint 2016. And they added some extra PowerShell commands that came in 2013 that have now been adopted in 2016 too, to allow easier management of adding SharePoint databases into the availability group. Because right now, the historic way of doing it, you add a new site collection with a content database, you have to speak to the DBA, they'll take a backup of it, they'll add it into the availability group, and then it will just work. But you can do that from SharePoint now. Use a load balancer. Anybody not using a load balancer yet? Perfect. That was the answer I was expecting. But yes, we should be load balancing because end user perception, it's really end user perception. As long as you've got service behind a load balancer, you can flick backwards and forwards and possibly look at using a multi-site load balancer too. It becomes even more important when you start to go hybrid as well, once you start building a hybrid environment. And then of course, extend to the cloud. I mean, don't host the servers yourself. Put the servers in Windows Azure or Amazon or Rackspace or whatever you want it to be. Put them into a cloud provider and extend them out of the core office. Put them there, because then it will reduce the management potentially of having it in your internal infrastructure. Or just go to a provider that gives you that. Then you can go in and say you can use Azure Cloud. You can extend your company office into the Azure Cloud and then do disaster site recovery from one place to another. Nothing more beautiful than watching a SharePoint environment get failed from on-premises straight into the Azure Cloud. And it just works. And that actually GA'd like a week or so ago, Azure Disaster Recovery. So you can now fail into the Azure Cloud, fantastic. And then you might decide to never come back. Just leave it in the Azure Cloud, it'll be fine. And then pay the $5 billion that it will charge for doing that. But these are options that you've got. When you're looking to build a 2016, it doesn't have to be on-premises. Unless you have regulations or specific reasons you have to keep it on-premises. On-premises doesn't have to be. And cloud, hate that word. Because it means everything, doesn't it? Are your servers in the cloud? Yep, they're in the data center. We don't own that, we just colo. Oh, that's the cloud. That's your private cloud. So, but you can move it to where you need to. So that will give you better scalability to be able to move things around. So core features and services. In SharePoint 2016, there were some core features and services that were kind of wrapped into it. So these are ones that are actually hidden in SharePoint 2016. So we have information management policy is actually a hidden service. Now, if you didn't know, project server is now wrapped into SharePoint 2016. So if you have that now and you want to go 2016, it's already built into the core product. So you just need to go in and provision the web application for project, and everything else is under the covers. So the calculation services, the event services, they're all built in out of the box now. Of course, you need to have an enterprise license, of course. For SharePoint, they don't give you that for nothing. They're like, it's in standard. No, not so much. You get foundation tracing and usage. They're hidden services that will track and keep tabs of everything that's going on. There's one that's called the portal service, the security token service, and the SSP job control. They're all hidden services that reside in SharePoint 2016. And you can't do anything about those. You can't configure those. You can't stop them. Nothing. Now, for the rest of the services only reside where they've been deployed. Now that's by design, and it's great, because one of the things that we used to always see is, like we talked about earlier, the internal load balancer would just fail on a request. You would do a search query and it would bounce around all the servers. You would get errors in the event log that really meant nothing. They just end up because it couldn't connect. So now those services are enabled where they're supposed to be. If you designate something as a front-end server, oops, they shouldn't have all come out as individual ones, then this is what you end up with on that box. So if I say front-end server, that's what you get. Everything that is needed. So think the logic through now. Remember, in 2013, if I open up a SharePoint site in my browser, I go to the Manage Metadata service from my browser, it goes back to the SharePoint server, the internal load balancer for SharePoint determines where it's supposed to call the web service from. That might not be the same box that I'm actually connected to. It could actually be one of the application servers somewhere else in the farm, because it looks at it and says, these servers are busy, throw it over there. By design, in SharePoint 2016, the local server is the first place that it goes. It will always prefer the box it's on. So that's why the front-end service, when you define that, has all of the components on that are needed, because it always goes local before hopping boxes, which means you end up with better performance now, because it's not having to wait for a connection to a different SharePoint server. It just does it there and then. Now, sometimes in 2013, it will do that, but it's not designed to do that. If you build an application server, then you'll actually end up with a little bit less of a list, or maybe a larger list. You build an application server, this is what you get enabled on those servers. So application and front end are probably the biggest ones that you'll end up with. If you then decide to go with a distributed cache server, now there are some changes here. Let me just go back. And some changes that I want to highlight. So right now in version 1 of MinRole, there's a couple of components that will get pushed. So claims to Windows token service is enabled. If you do a distributed cache, it's enabled by default. Also, SharePoint Foundation web application and the request management. All three of those are enabled by default in MinRole version 1. So for those that have it in lab right now, that's what you have. They'll be enabled. But if you update to Feature Pack 1 when it comes out and go to MinRole 2, then those three services don't get enabled by default on a distributed cache server, because they wanted to reduce the footprint of the distributed cache server even more. Now, if you go with a combined role, then yes, it'll be part of that. But just be aware that there are some changes where services won't be enabled on those boxes. The goal here, remember, is to reduce the footprint of stuff that's on a server. That's the goal. You're trying to get the most out of the investment of the servers that you've got. So reducing the footprint is only going to help that. When you build a search one, you obviously get the list of search components. Wrong one. Obviously a shorter list. Notice that the web application service doesn't reside there. So there's no IaaS websites that host the SharePoint environment. Anybody doing the bit where you crawl the SharePoint environment on the SharePoint server? Okay, a couple of you. Some of you may not know, but you may be doing that now. It was a way that Microsoft, it's actually quite interesting because Microsoft pushed us down the route of doing that because it was better and it was faster, because you obviously crawling locally and it doesn't go cross servers. Then they came back and started shouting at us, saying that no, you shouldn't do that. It should just naturally use DNS to find the URL, which means that if you don't know, all of your search queries are obviously being sent out through the load balancer and back in again, because that's how the DNS is going to work. So if you have search performance issues, it could be that. If you've used Auto SP Installer, then it will have put local host entries on the machines anyway. So it'll be doing it locally, which actually is not what you're supposed to do, but I won't say a word. So when you're building SharePoint 2016, database infrastructure, the requirements, SQL Server 2014, Service Pack 1 is the minimum that you can use. So if you don't have that yet in your SharePoint environment, that's step number 1, is to build a new database infrastructure. Or you can go with SQL 2016. SQL 2016 is fully baked. Obviously, it's not been out for long, but it's fully baked for SharePoint 2016. It also means if you do 2016, you get benefits of other components that are built into SQL 2016. So if you're using things like reporting services integrated into SharePoint, and you want to go 2016, I would go with SQL Server 2016 and then get the benefits of the mobile reporting piece and the new SQL reporting services that was basically a rip-off of the DataZen acquisition. And then if you're going to build a design for a SharePoint infrastructure with database, one of the ones that have worked out really well is that we have SharePoint wrapped over the top. We have all of our web applications. We create a content instance within SQL Server, and then we use encrypted disks. Now, you don't have to use encrypted disks, but there's no reason why you shouldn't, because you don't get there's not great encryption that goes through SharePoint right now. So the only SharePoint encryption that you get, it would be transparent data encryption, which is at rest. So it's not actually in transit. So you would build a content instance, you would build a configuration instance of SQL, and you would build a services instance of SQL. Now that doesn't mean you have separate SQL farms. That means you can have 3 instances of SQL Server running on the same implementation. So I build a SQL Server farm, I build 3 different instances, I allocate 1. So this one, it's just content. This one, configuration database, service applications. This one, auxiliary services, when you install Workflow Manager and things like that, that's where that goes. So if you put it in perspective, what you end up with is this instance of SQL Server ends up with, right now, 6 databases. If you install just Workflow, that'll give you 6 instances. So you get 3 service bus databases and 3 workflow. When you go to service applications and configuration, you're probably going to end up with about 18. That's about the number that goes in here. And then this will be whatever you want to. Now, I suppose the question would be, is why would you have 3 instances versus 1 instance? Well, it's all about isolation and segmentation. If we're reducing the surface area of attack, so I talk a lot on hacking things like this. I actually gave a presentation back in London where we actually broke a SharePoint environment by breaking the Active Directory and then hacking into SQL. And we actually hacked into SQL, and I didn't even need to hack into SharePoint because there was no need, because I already had everything. Because everything was in one SQL instance. And what port does SQL Server run on? Really? Nobody knows what port? 1433, and there's a secondary port, UDP, for extra bonus point. Who knows that? Oh, this is a letdown. No. 1434, it's only one number higher, but it's a UDP one. But I know that, and so if I'm going to come and hack the SQL Server, because I can download a tool that's freely available, scan the network, find the SQL Server, and just knock on the door until I break in. If I break in, I can get all the databases, but wouldn't it be interesting if I couldn't find SQL Server? Because I'm using different ports for each of my instances, which SharePoint does support. So now I have 3 instances. Let's say I'm smart enough to figure out one of those ports, and I managed to break into the auxiliary one. Woohoo! I've now managed to get the workflow and service bus databases that have nothing in them. But I didn't get the content. And then, of course, you wrap transparent data encryption over the top. So it's encrypted. So if I steal the databases, I can't restore them because I don't have the key. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can do. So when you look at building your SharePoint environments, make sure you cater for the database design. 90% of performance issues that I've seen with SharePoint environments have either been web front-end problems or database issues. Because we don't build the database infrastructure as well as we should do. We just kind of, it's a secondary, oh, we just need a SQL Server. And so we just throw stuff on it. So let's just review where we got to. The November feature pack, 1 is required for the new min role options that you'll need. Distributed cache most definitely won't work as expected. It just doesn't sometimes. Min role allows for controlled infrastructure. Min role can, I called it auto heal. It does, auto heals based on defined rules. Roles can be mixed to create custom infrastructure in whatever format you want to. Services don't just auto-provision on all of the servers. And that's important to know. It doesn't just go everywhere. And zero downtime patching, I'm sure you've all heard of that. Anybody excited by zero downtime patching? It's a lie! No, it's not a lie. But it doesn't work if you have one server in each role. How can it do zero downtime if you patch the web front end and you don't have a secondary? So zero downtime patching only works with high availability. High availability min role would be 2 of each role. Then it will do zero downtime patching. Because the patches, so right now, the latest patches for 2013, you will download about 3 gigs worth of stuff. Each patch is about, you get the actual exe, the MSI, which is about 1.5 gig. Then you get the magic Uber file, the uber.cab file, which is 1.5 gig too, and then a smaller file. For 2016, they're 300 meg. It's a 300 meg patch that you literally just install and it's done. And what it does, when you apply it, it will take that individual server offline. As soon as it finishes installing, it flicks it back online automatically. I actually went and did this the other day for a client where we actually patched to the latest 2016 patch, and we literally had zero downtime because the schema updates and stuff come later on. Because you also remember that zero downtime patching is done because they change the way that they patch. So instead of saying, here's your 1.5 gig file, go patch everything, the patches now only patch the pieces that need to be patched, which I'm sure you all sat there thinking, well, that's what I thought they did in the first place. No, they basically patched everything in one go, gave you the whole lot. Just patch everything. It's basically installing SharePoint from scratch. That's really what's actually happening because they're making changes to core DLLs. But when you do 2016 zero downtime, it's just the pieces. Plan for hybrid design right now. That's really, really important. We could have spent another hour talking about just hybrid design of what you need for that to work. But when you're looking at 2016, you will look at going hybrid at some point because somebody will come to a conference and learn about Delve and learn about OneDrive in the cloud and everything else, and they'll want to utilize that. That doesn't change your core infrastructure design, but there are some things to understand when it comes to hybrid, just how traffic communicates backwards and forwards. So, thank you for coming for the session. Remember to rate your session and you can win prizes.